Several months ago, there were rumors of a Kirby Planet Robobot Remaster coming for the Switch. A rumor that's sort of been feeling a little less likely as time goes on. Of course, anything can happen in the future, but one of the main things some people have been saying they'd hope to see in a potential Robobot Remaster is the inclusion of a Susie Epilogue. But with the lingering hope that a Robobot Remaster could maybe still happen, what could a Susie Epilogue potentially be like in terms of its gameplay, setting, and even its story? Well, sit back, relax, and let's talk about the potential behind a Susie Epilogue if Kirby Planet Robobot ever does get a remaster. Starting with, where could a Susie Epilogue even take place? And what could the gameplay be like if it did happen? For the setting, I think there are two options that could maybe make sense for a hypothetical Susie Epilogue. One of them I'll talk about later, but another potential setting could be another dimension, given that she's been there before. Though, it probably wouldn't work as well given the Magolor Epilogue has already taken place there. But then again, another dimension has been given a distinct appearance before in different games, so maybe using it as a setting for a Susie Epilogue could work. Some have mentioned wanting a Susie prologue, reasons being to learn how she escaped another dimension after being stuck there for a long time. But I think we could still get those answers in an epilogue just by having something like flashbacks that show us how she escaped. Now there's also the overall gameplay. Well, the Magolor Epilogue was a bit different from the usual Kirby experience. Since Magolor was just beaten by Kirby, he was in a weakened state, so you had to upgrade his abilities to make them stronger. There's also the fact that you could get combos from hitting enemies, and you'd earn more points the higher the number was, so you were really encouraged to get through the levels as fast as you can. That doesn't say a Susie Epilogue has to play exactly like the Magolor Epilogue, but elements like upgradable abilities could likely still work. Susie's whole thing is that she uses inventions, so I can see that playing into things like making her blaster or her mech stronger, maybe even giving them new abilities that weren't introduced in Star Allies. But I'd love to know your own ideas on what Susie Epilogue could be like in terms of gameplay. But besides setting and gameplay, I think a Susie Epilogue has a lot of potential to be a very character-driven experience. If a Susie Epilogue were to happen, what would the source of conflict be? Well, I think there's a potential good answer to that in World 5 of Planet Robobot, Rhythm Route, where Susie reveals one of Haltman Works Company's creations, a purple substance capable of creating clones of someone or something based on their DNA. Here, you first see this happen when the purple substance uses King Deity's DNA to turn into a clone of the king himself. The clones are strong and can even split into multiple copies of itself, but according to the pause text, it's also imperfect. When a Meta Nightmare returns, we see that it's capable of creating clones of two final bosses from past Kirby games, specifically Dark Matter from Dreamland 2 and Queen Sextonia from Triple Deluxe. But like the DD clones, these clones in Meta Nightmare are also imperfect. That's what makes this a potential source of conflict for Susie Epilogue. What if this substance was reused in an antagonistic role, but this time, it's actually capable of creating perfect clones of bosses based on their DNA? It could serve as a way to not just give us more powerful versions of bosses in Robobot, but maybe even some from past games. But then again, why would the clones be used against Susie? What could possibly cause a scenario like this to happen? Well, there's one certain element I think could make this idea work. Something that's related to Susie, but not in Kirby Planet Robobot, and that's Susie's another dimension counterpart, Parallel Susie. What if Parallel Susie was used as the main antagonist for Susie Epilogue, representing what Susie could have possibly turned into if she went down a much darker path in life? After all, what happens to Haltman and Robobot's main story isn't what she intended. All she wanted was to steal Stardream's data, not risk her father's life. If Susie went as far as to betray her father and even says that she only acted out wanting to teach her father a lesson for forgetting about her, or get him to remember, if we're talking about the Japanese version, then that implies that she must have felt hurt that her own father had forgotten about her, but didn't intend to put Haltman's life in danger. But for this epilogue story, what if Parallel Susie was made to be a bit different? Not as in this version wanted to put Haltman's life at risk, but in how she portrays her father. What if, at least for this hypothetical epilogue story, to make Parallel Susie a more villainous counterpart to regular Susie, instead of trying to steal Stardream's data to give to a startup company, she tried to overthrow her father as the head of the Haltman Works Company and the new admin of Stardream, because that's kinda what happens with Meta Knight in Meta Nightmare Returns. After Meta Knight takes Haltman down, Stardream recognizes him as a new admin, which leads to the boss fights with the two final boss clones and Galactonite. We could have the same thing happen in the Susie epilogue where, instead of Susie stealing Stardream's data, the counterpart, Parallel Susie, takes over the company by force, acting as the controller of her world's version of Stardream, and continuing to mechanize planets in her father's place, with her own access art, which I think could work as a setting for a Susie epilogue, since it's pretty much big enough to house multiple levels. So part of me thinks that it could work as a hub world where Susie can access different levels, much like how Another Dimension was used in the same way for the Magolor Epilogue. This could also work as a way to make a Susie Epilogue less straightforward than the Magolor Epilogue, at least story-wise, potentially. The Magolor Epilogue is great and worth playing, but it was more about gameplay and showing us the aftermath of Magolor's actions and the Master Crown. And don't get me wrong, I'm by no means trying to say that's a bad thing. There's no problem with that focus at all, especially with how fun the Magolor Epilogue is. But I think this approach for Parallel Susie could work as a way to show us how our Susie truly feels about her father deep down. Maybe by giving them conflicting viewpoints of Haltman, with Susie still caring about her father despite everything that's happened, and Parallel Susie having little to no care for her father because of everything that's happened. Including Parallel Susie as the epilogue's villain could also tie into Robobot's whole theme of improving the old by changing it with the new. Haltman views his conquest to mechanized planets as granting its company eternal prosperity, and there are at least some views of their mechanization as creating a better version of the original. It's at least implied with Mechanite, where Susie views this form of Mechanite as a worthy tool for the company, and even introduces Mechanite Plus, an improvement over the previous Mechanite. Maybe Parallel Susie could have the motivation of replacing her counterpart, viewing her more morally good version as inferior, and herself as superior because of all the power she gained from overthrowing Haltman. Conflict can maybe revolve around Susie fighting against powerful clones under Parallel Susie's control, this time with complete DNA, maybe with other mechanical modifications on top of that. And if the clones are made through DNA, maybe this could even be used outside of boss fights. Imagine a scenario where, near the end of the epilogue, Parallel Susie, as a last resort, uses the purple substance to try and create a complete clone of President Haltman, just to screw with Susie mentally and emotionally. This could lead to a moment where Parallel Susie could offer to create a complete clone of Haltman, maybe on the condition that she gives up her rebellion against her Another Dimension counterpart, or probably relinquish everything in our Susie's version of the company to Parallel Susie, an offer that our Susie would of course reject, likely saying that accepting such an offer would betray her true memories of her father, and that no copy, no matter how complete, could ever replace that. This could lead to the true final boss fight of the epilogue, which, given how Kirby final bosses usually work, that could be anything. But if we're going by the idea of Parallel Susie being the main villain, this final boss could probably be some kind of secret weapon that Parallel Susie's been developing for a long time. In the Magolor Epilogue, the final boss of the story is the Master Crown itself. Since this is Susie's story, maybe the final boss could be Parallel Susie's own dimensional version of Stardream, possibly heavily modified by Parallel Susie, and like I said before, maybe even having her be in control of Stardream. Of course, the fight itself likely wouldn't be the same, given you fight Stardream by using the halberd, but it could maybe be like the final phase of Stardream Solo S, where the stage itself isn't entirely walled by 2D, as you can move to different parts of the arena. And in a way, it'd almost be a fitting way to end off the epilogue, with Susie overcoming a more villainous counterpart of her, who's controlling a possibly stronger version of the very thing that caused her father and her so much grief. But while these are just my own ideas on what I think a hypothetical Susie Epilogue could be like, I'd love to know your own ideas and thoughts on how Susie Epilogue could play out. Whether it's just the gameplay, the setting, or even how the story might play out. Also, if you like in-depth videos on Kirby and would love to see more, I think you'll really like my playlist of Kirby video essays and a theory video I've made on Kirby's 4 Matters. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please do leave a like to help spread this video out to other Kirby fans, and subscribe to stay updated on when more will come in the future. With all that said, thank you so much for watching all the way through, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Take care, everyone.